My name is John, and I never thought that one day I would find myself in the epicenter of events that would resemble a detective novel more than my usual everyday life. I was born and raised in a small, quiet town in the Midwest, where people always seem to be confident in the future and value family ties more than anything else in the world. My younger brother, whose name is Mark, grew up as a calm and balanced child. I loved him and always treated him protectively, despite the fact that our characters differed like heaven and earth. He was a sensible dreamer, and I was a slightly hot-tempered realist. And now, years later, fate humorously decreed that we found ourselves in the center of one of the strangest episodes, which almost destroyed everything we knew. My wife, Evelyn, has always seemed like the most reliable person in the world to me. When we got married, I was sure that our marriage would be the unshakable support that would help me move forward, no matter what the circumstances. However, I could not imagine how sophisticated betrayal could be and what a dramatic story would unfold as a result. One day, while I was on a business trip in another state, Evelyn called me. I was just leaving my hotel room for an important meeting, and I couldn't even imagine what news I was about to hear. There was a strange determination in her voice, almost devoid of emotion. "John," she said quietly, "we need to talk. It's urgent." I sighed and locked the door to the room. Thoughts about the upcoming meeting with the partners were spinning in my head, but Evelyn's tone made me wait. "Of course," I responded, trying to speak in a way that would not reveal my slight excitement. "Did something happen?" "Yes, and I want to say this right away," she replied, and there was a cold note in her voice that I hadn't heard before. "I sold our house." The ground was literally pulled out from under my feet. I froze in place, unable to believe what I was hearing. Our family history was connected with this house. We chose it together after the wedding. It was a cozy two-story mansion with a garden, surrounded by green lawns and old trees that had been planted by the previous owners. I could not understand how it was possible to sell the house so quickly, alone, without my consent. "Evelyn," I asked, hoping I'd misheard. "What do you mean, you sold our house? How is that even possible?" "It's simple," she replied. "I completed all the necessary formalities, signed the papers at the notary's office, and handed over the documents to the new owner. The money has already been deposited into the account. I decided that it would be better for me." "For you?" I asked, struggling to keep my composure. "But what about me, Evelyn? Don't you understand that we have a common marriage, common obligations?" "Our marriage no longer exists in my heart," came the voice on the other end of the line. "I've decided to live my own life, and I think I have the right to do so. Oh, and one more thing. I'm moving in with your brother. He's ready to support me." I felt my heart tighten. Thoughts raced through my head. How could this happen? Why didn't Mark tell me? How could they deceive me together? But despite the inner shock, I managed to squeeze out a calm answer. "I understand you, Evelyn," I said almost without emotion and hung up. At that moment, I was overwhelmed by conflicting feelings. I didn't know how to react, whether to rush home or immediately call a lawyer. But decisions came gradually. In the next few hours, I had important negotiations with business partners that I couldn't miss. Despite everything, I remained a professional, and personal problems should not ruin my business reputation. After a long and difficult conversation with my business colleagues, I finally canceled some of my trips in order to return to my hometown as soon as possible and figure out what my wife had done. I couldn't believe that she had acted alone. I was overwhelmed with the desire to know the details, to understand what the motive was and why Mark, my brother, was involved in this. When I returned, the house was in its usual place, but it no longer felt like home. There was a freshly painted number on the gate, and the garden was littered with branches and leaves, as if no one had looked after it for a long time. I stood in front of our doors and couldn't bring myself to go in. It seemed as if I would raise my hand, ring the doorbell, and it would not be my wife who would open the door, but a complete stranger. And, in fact, that was the case. Evelyn ceased to be a part of my life the very moment she voiced her decision. Instead of trying to get into the house, I drove to a friend I knew from high school named Greg. He was a lawyer who specialized in property law. I trusted Greg because we were friends, and I knew he could help me find a way out of this chaos. When I burst into his office, I was greeted by a calm, almost serene atmosphere, light-colored walls, a few diplomas on the wall, and an impressive shelf of law books. Greg stood up when he saw me and smiled, but the smile quickly disappeared when he noticed my exhausted expression. "John," he said, "what's wrong? You look like you've been through a meat grinder." "You could say that," I replied, nervously clenching my fists. "My wife sold our house, and she said she was going to live with my brother." Greg frowned. "Sold? How did that happen?" I gave him a brief outline of the deal. The deal was supposedly legal, but I wasn't even informed. We had jointly acquired property, and she somehow managed to write me out of the documents. I had no idea how she'd pulled it off legally. "Greg," I said when I finished my story, "I need my house back. I won't let someone take away not only my property, but also the memories of what we created together." Greg sighed. "The situation is, frankly speaking, unpleasant, but not hopeless. We need to find out what documents were signed, whether you were aware when they were being drawn up, and for what reasons you could have been bypassed. If there is even the slightest violation of the law, we will return your house to you through the courts." I listened to these words and felt a spark of hope ignite within me. However, feelings of betrayal, anger, and even shame were still mixed in my head. I didn't want the town where I lived to start whispering behind my back. But even more, I didn't want to be deceived by my wife and brother. And I was going to fight for justice. After that, I dialed Mark's number. I had to take a deep breath before I could speak. "Mark, it's John. Can you explain what's going on?" There was silence on the other end of the line, and I felt my brother sigh. "John, I knew this conversation would happen sooner or later," he said. "Tell me, why didn't you warn me?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me anything when you realized there was something between you and Evelyn?" "You see, I didn't fully understand it myself," Mark muttered. "She came to me when you had your last fight. She said that you didn't pay enough attention to your family, that you were always on business trips. At first, I just wanted to calm her down, support her. And then, I asked again, hoping he would continue. Then she said she didn't love you. She loved me," Mark said heavily. "I really didn't want to ruin your life, but things moved too fast. She claimed she had a right to the house since it was mostly in her name. I didn't know she was going to do the deal so quietly." I was silent as I listened to this confession and felt the indignation boiling inside me. But there was also a strange emptiness, as if part of me had known in advance that this would happen. "Are you aware that she did it all illegally?" I finally asked. "Yes, I know now," Mark replied. "But I don't know what documents she managed to forge." "John, I didn't mean to do this. I didn't mean to take your house away from you." I hung up, unable to listen to his excuses any longer. I had one goal, to sort things out legally and then decide how to live my life. Yes, I had lost my wife, I had lost my brother, but I was not going to lose my future. After the unpleasant conversation with Evelyn, I felt an urgent need to talk to my parents. Although I had long since become independent, their opinion and support meant a lot to me. I called my mother and asked for an urgent meeting. She, hearing my tense voice, immediately agreed. "John, come over. Your father and I will talk to you about what's going on." I went to my parents' house, where I spent my childhood. My parents still lived in a small cottage with a well-kept yard. My father met me at the door. My mother sat me down at the table and poured me some tea. "Tell me," said the father, taking off his glasses. "What's the matter?" I told them about Evelyn's call, about selling the house and her intention to live with Mark. My mother put her hand to her mouth and my father clenched his fists. "It's incredible," he said. "How could she do that? Mark is your brother." "Dad," I sighed heavily, "that's true. But now I'm going to fight to get my home back." Mother asked, "Did you talk to Mark?" He admitted that they were having an affair, but allegedly didn't know about her plans to sell the house behind my back. The father was silent, then said, "Will you go to the end?" "Yes, I hired a lawyer, and the court will put everything in its place." Mother touched my shoulder. "We will help you, son, with finances, advice, whatever you need." I thanked them, telling them not to communicate with either Evelyn or Mark unless absolutely necessary. The next day, my father called. I couldn't help myself and said to Mark, "What have you done?" He muttered that he didn't want this outcome. I told him not to come to us until everything was resolved. My heart sank because I understood the pain my parents were going through. But there was no turning back. Late in the evening, returning to an empty apartment, I could not sleep for a long time. The words of a father disappointed in one of his sons were spinning in my head. But I knew that I had to move on, because only a strong determination and faith in justice could help me save my future. I vowed to stand until the truth prevailed. From that moment on, endless visits to lawyers, collection of certificates, extracts, and testimonies began. Greg, as promised, handled the case confidently and firmly. He found a lot of inconsistencies in the documents that Evelyn's side presented. Moreover, fraudulent practices were uncovered when concluding the purchase and sale agreement. The signature was supposedly from my side, but the examination at the first stage showed that it was a forgery. We filed a lawsuit and began to wait. At the same time, I was trying to pull myself together emotionally. I moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts, which I used solely as a place to sleep, since I spent most of my time in the office and in meetings with lawyers and witnesses. It seemed to me that my life had turned into a series of empty corridors, where I constantly had to prove that I was me, that I had rights, and that no one could dispose of my property without my knowledge. One day, when I was sitting in my apartment, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it and saw Evelyn standing in front of me. I never thought that she would come to me after everything that had happened. I froze, not knowing how to react. She looked at me from under her lowered eyelashes, as if she did not understand why she herself had come. "John," she said, trying to find at least a drop of sympathy in my eyes, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. She entered and looked around. My modest apartment was clearly no match for the cozy home we once shared. I closed the door, then turned to her. "What do you want, Evelyn?" "I wanted to talk," she said quietly. "I think we should discuss our situation." "What's there to discuss?" I responded coldly. "You sold the house without my knowledge, moved in with my brother, and abandoned me at the most unexpected moment. What else is there to say?" She pressed her lips together. "You have become a stranger to me, John. But at the same time, I still have some feeling of guilt. Perhaps I acted too harshly. I do not want there to be eternal hostility between us." "What about eternal betrayal?" I smiled bitterly. "Do you realize that you and I were married, and that your step is not just a misunderstanding, but a real crime? You forged my documents, deprived me of the right to jointly acquired property, and you still expect me to be lenient with you?" She lowered her head. "I didn't know it would go this far. I just wanted to start a new life. I was tired of waiting for you to come back from your business trips and pay attention to me. And for this we had to sell our common house?" I asked sarcastically. "I thought you would never understand how bad I feel," she whispered. But apparently I made a lot of mistakes. We stood there for a few minutes in silence, as if these words were supposed to explain everything. But it was clear to me that I understood only one thing. Our shared past had been erased by her actions. Evelyn smelled of expensive perfume, but I no longer felt any passion for her or the desire to hug her. There was only coldness, and she seemed to sense it. "You better go," I said, handing her my coat from the hanger. "I'll see you in court." She didn't argue. She turned and walked out without a word, leaving the door open. I walked into the hallway, looked at the shabby furniture, and realized that I was truly alone. But this loneliness was better than any lie. I needed to focus on the process, and I wasn't going to sacrifice my pride. The trial lasted several months. They found experts who confirmed the fact of the signature forgery. Evelyn's defense tried to prove that I allegedly signed the papers voluntarily. Mark testified. He seemed depressed and embarrassed, realizing that his role in this story was extremely negative. But the testimony of the experts and the evidence collected by Greg spoke for themselves. In the end, the court made a decision. The transaction was declared invalid. The house was returned to me. I also filed for divorce. And the court satisfied this issue almost without discussion. There was no talk of preserving the family. After the trial, I walked out of the building where the hearing was taking place, and Greg shook my hand in shock. "Congratulations," he said. "It was a tough fight." "Thanks, Greg," I replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled. "What are you going to do next?" I looked up at the sky and suddenly felt a strange sense of relief, as if the chains that had bound me for so many months had finally fallen apart. And although I still had to get my house in order and my finances sorted out, I felt like life was opening up a new page for me. "I'll probably go back to my house," I replied, and slowly start putting it in order. Maybe I'll invite some of my friends who are skilled in the crafts to check everything out. I need to get rid of the taste of betrayal that's been hanging over it all this time. When I returned to the house, it felt alien to me, even though it was technically mine. I decided to take extreme measures, replace the furniture, repaint the walls, make everything as if I was starting my life from scratch. At one point, I even called in a team of designers to help me present the space from a different perspective. I wanted to have nothing in front of my eyes that reminded me of Evelyn's betrayal. At the same time, I continued working, taking on new projects, going on new business trips. But now there was peace inside me. The betrayal I had experienced had not broken my self-confidence at all, but rather strengthened it. I realized that I could make my own decisions and build my own destiny without looking back at those who did not appreciate my feelings. 6 months after all the legal battles and renovations, I met a young woman named Alice in one of my clients' offices. She was a business development manager, and by chance we found ourselves at the same table during negotiations. A casual smile, an exchange of pleasantries, and now, after work was over, we were sitting in a small coffee shop, discussing something far removed from contracts and deals. Alice turned out to be a cheerful, sociable, and very sensitive conversationalist. I didn't want to rush and certainly didn't want to tell her about my past relationships, but she, being sensitive, didn't get to the bottom of my slight fatigue, but simply suggested that we see where our conversation would lead us. We started dating. At first it was the occasional dinner, then walks in the park, then short weekend trips to neighboring cities. I didn't notice how warmth was coming into my life again. Alice did everything so that I felt more confident about the future, and if I sometimes remembered the pain of the past, it seemed further and further away, as if the fog had melted and disappeared over the horizon. One evening we were sitting on the veranda of my, now unconditionally mine, home. I was showing her the renovated rooms, telling her how I had changed every corner to get rid of old associations. She listened, asked questions, shook her head in understanding. As we stepped out onto the lawn, Alice looked up at the sky and said softly, "It seems like everything here is breathing new life. You really did a colossal job." "Thank you," I said, smiling. "Without you, it would have been much more difficult for me. You brought into my life the feeling that everything would be fine." She turned to me. "Sometimes it seems to me that you have to go through betrayal to understand the value of true feelings." I covered her palm with my hand. "Maybe you're right." We sat on the bench for a long time, enjoying the peace and every minute spent together. A few months later, I proposed to her. It wasn't a grand gesture with a crowd of photographers, but a sincere conversation when we returned from another trip. I got down on one knee right in the middle of the living room and said, "Alice, you know what I've been through. You know how hard it was for me to trust a person again. But you opened my eyes, showed me that true love does exist. Marry me, and I'll do everything to make you feel like the most loved person in the world." Alice smiled and said only a short yes, but in her eyes I saw everything I had ever dreamed of. We got married in the company of close friends and my parents. Mark, of course, was not there. I did not feel the need to invite him, because he had chosen his own path, and I did not regret this decision. Sometimes we can forgive, but we do not have to let a traitor back into our lives. After the wedding, Alice and I settled into our cozy home, and every time I walked through the hallways that used to remind me of pain, I saw happy memories that we created together. New family photos, a pleasant atmosphere, evening gatherings by the fireplace, and morning breakfasts in the sunny dining room. Everything said that life goes on, and if you believe in goodness, it will one day knock on your door. I didn't settle scores with anyone. After all, the law punished those who did wrong. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted to be free and happy. And now I have everything I need for a full life, a loving wife, a restored home, a job I respect. People often ask me, "How did you survive such a crash?" And I answer, sometimes you have to go through a storm to see how bright the sky can be after a thunderstorm. Now, if someone I know recalls this story, I no longer feel bitterness. On the contrary, I see how amazingly life works. It challenges us, tests us. But if we keep hope in our souls and act according to our conscience, then we are rewarded with something more valuable, freedom, love, and the opportunity to start all over again. Yes, my wife betrayed me, but in the end I found myself and met the one who gave me true happiness. And the house that was once sold without my knowledge is now filled with joy and new dreams. So I hold no grudge against Evelyn or my brother. Everyone chooses their own path. But most importantly, I chose my own path, the path that leads to happiness and peace of mind. And I am grateful to fate for this chance to start with a clean slate. This is a story about how one phone call can change your life. But in the end, everything can turn out for the better if you don't give up.